Good morning and welcome to the 2021 University of Illinois Dudley Smith Farm Winter Meeting. My name is Ashley Bell and I am an environmental and energy stewardship educator for the University of Illinois. So just a few general housekeeping items before we get started today. If you could assist us by completing the demographics poll questions that we have on the screen, we would definitely appreciate that. And so this meeting is being recorded. And when this recording is available for viewing, a notice will be sent out by email. So to help us reduce background noise as well as to increase bandwidth, we ask that meeting participants to please keep your videos off as well as your microphones muted throughout the meeting. And if you have any questions, please feel free to place them in the chat box and I will compile those questions for the presenters and they will answer them after the end of their presentations. So I have Amanda Cole, the county director, who is helping to facilitate the meeting today. So she will also be screening the chat box and providing you with assistance as needed. So I wanted to bring your attention to an upcoming event that's on Thursday, and that is a Waste to Renewable Energy webinar that's discussing using anaerobic digestion technology to convert organic waste materials such as manures and crop residues into renewable energy. And this is a webinar that is a part of the Everyday Environment webinar series. This event is free and registration can be found online at go.illinois.edu/everyday environment webinars. So again, we would like to welcome you and we thank you for attending the Dudley Smith Farm Winter Meeting today. So since our meeting is virtual this year, we have many new people that are in our audience from outside of Illinois as well. So I briefly would like to introduce the Dudley Smith Initiative. So about 25 years ago, Dudley Smith Jr. left 228 acres of farmland, as well as a substantial endowment to the University of Illinois College of Agricultural, Consumer, and Environmental Sciences. So that farmland, which is called the Dudley Smith Farm, it's located in Christian County. It's right off of Route 29 between Taylorville and Pana, Illinois. So this farm is utilized as a field scale site for collaborative agricultural research because Dudley Smith, he strongly believed in supporting efforts that would not only sustain the farming community, but also the rural environment as well. So as our researchers, as we are acquiring new knowledge, as technologies are evolving, the university, we are committed to making sure we are sharing this research and this evidence-based information throughout the community because we really want to assist people in making informed decisions regarding farm management practices. And so through the Dudley Smith Initiative, we are able to provide educational outreach such as this meeting right here. So typically each year we will host 2 outreach events and those events are free and they're open to the public. So in the summertime, we actually have, usually in June, we have a field day event that's actually hosted at the farm itself. And this gives participants the chance to see up close and in person some of the research that's being conducted at the farm. And in the wintertime, we will host an event at the local extension office. So these outreach events typically bring together speakers from academia as well as the agricultural industry to discuss the latest research regarding beef cattle management, water quality, nutrient management, cover crops, as well as soil health. So I would like to launch an additional poll question to find out is this your first time attending a Dudley Smith Farm event? And how did you hear about this event? And while we're waiting on a few more responses, I'm going to go ahead and place the link to today's meeting agenda in the chat box for you. So thank you so much for answering those poll questions. It seems like about a third of you are first-time attendees. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and introduce our first presenter, who is Dan Scheich. And Dan, he is a University of Illinois Animal Sciences Associate Professor. So Dan, if you would like to share your slides now.
Okay, I'm working on it here. The
Okay.
polling was still on my screen. I had to close out that poll. So.
Okay.
All right. Can you see that screen?
I can.
Okay. Would you like me to leave my video on of me as well, or do you
Yes,
want me?
you can leave your video on and make sure that you put us in slideshow view.
How about that?
That's great.
Okay. Well, good morning. It's certainly a pleasure to be with you all here virtually, and obviously just kind of the way we are operating in these times, but looking forward to visiting with you a little bit about a project that was recently funded and that is underway. But first, want to give you just a little bit of background and introduction on myself. I've been at the University of Illinois for 20 some years now, which is hard to believe, but did my master's and PhD here at the University of Illinois, and then stayed on in a faculty position. I'm originally from West Central Illinois, where my dad and brother still farm and run cows there, but have called the greater Champaign-Urbana area home for some time now. My research program is focused on cow-calf nutrition and management. And within that, I guess that covers a lot of things. I have a research program that is very systems based, and I'm interested basically from conception all the way through that end product. And so really do have interest in a wide variety of project areas. For those of you that maybe aren't from this area or attending some of these meetings for the first time, don't know much about our University of Illinois beef cattle system, I'll give you just a quick overview. I'll save a little bit of that because Lucas Nera, who's presenting later, I think will go in greater detail about one of our sites. But this picture up here in the top left is an aerial view of our campus farm. That farm was built in 2004, and obviously it looks a little different than your typical beef farm because there's so many buildings. And we do have a large indoor capacity for feedlot cattle, where there's currently could be anywhere from 600 to 900 head on feed at any given time. Actually, I have a couple truckloads of cattle making a cold trip north from Dixon Springs this morning and should be arriving here after lunch today. But this facility is pretty unique in that we have grow safe capacity to get individual feed intake. We have a metabolism barn, so really allows for a lot of intensive research. This middle picture here is from the Dixon Springs Center in Southern Illinois. Again, I'll let Lucas tell you about that operation, but it's a large cow-calf operation run about 800 cows, do a lot of grazing work and heifer development type projects. And then this bottom picture here is from our cattle operation in Western Illinois, the Orr Beef Research Center, where we run about 200 Sim-Angus cows. And because of this dry lot facility here allows us to do a variety of research. Myself, as well as Dr. Josh McCann, who's our feedlot nutritionist, we typically have 8 to 10 graduate students working in the beef cattle area. So not the largest program in the U.S., but definitely one of the bigger beef cattle nutrition programs. So you may ask then, why am I going to talk about cover crops and what's my interest there? Well, as I told you, I have several different research areas, and one of those areas is really looking at pasture alternatives. And that's because here in the Midwest, as many of you know, we don't have any additional acres of pasture being put into production each year. It seems like each year we probably have fewer acres of pasture available due to expansion of cropland and just general urban sprawl. And so a lot of what we do is trying to find alternatives to that. Some of our work is in dry lot and confinement cow-calf. So that facility over in Western Illinois that I showed you a picture of before, we've used that facility not only to winter cows, but we've also looked at keeping cow-calf pairs in that facility during the spring and summer and trying to evaluate what are considerations that producers need to think about if they're going to house those cows and calves in that spring and summertime. What are the costs associated with that? What kind of management tweaks do we need to impose, and what are the health considerations? We've also done a lot of alternative feedstuff evaluation. So primarily that has been in crop residue and co-product feeds. So evaluating distillers grains, corn gluten feed, soybean hulls, and then combining that with corn crop residue. We've done some soybean stubble, and again, just coming up with a TMR or winter feeding option to replace hay. We know hay is kind of the standard, but depending on the year and depending on the availability, there can be less expensive options. I've also done some corn crop residue grazing work, and actually a lot of that work that I've done has taken place at the Dudley Smith farm. And so I've been involved with a couple previous projects that were funded by the Dudley Smith initiative and took place there at the Dudley Smith farm in Pana, where we looked at what were the impacts of grazing that corn crop residue, not only on the cows, but then also on the subsequent crop, as well as some of the soil characteristics. As we know, most of our cattle producers here in the Midwest are also grain farmers. And so these decisions and these evaluations of these systems, we really have to look at not only the cattle side, but also the crop side to see if it's a good decision. And then finally, I saved this for last because this is what I'm going to focus on here today. Certainly have an interest in cover crop utilization. This has no doubt been a growing area. There's a lot of interest. The majority of the cover crop research that has taken place across the country up until now has probably focused primarily on the agronomy side and on soil health and on subsequent crop production. There has been some work related to cattle, and there's certainly interest from cattle producers, but the majority of the federal funding that has been available has really been targeted to trying to understand the agronomy side of it. And so we were fortunate that there was another call for proposals here from the Dudley Smith initiative. And this Dudley Smith initiative has always had an interest in some of these projects that really span a variety of disciplines and look at integrated systems. That's really what that farm was put in place for, was to evaluate some of these integrated livestock and crop operations. And so a cover crop project seemed like a great fit. And so we did put together a proposal in the late fall there of 2019, integrating cover crops and grain and beef cattle operations for Soil-Livestock Synergies. As you heard, I obviously am the animal scientist and a beef cattle person, but needed to, if we were going to do this project and be able to do it in a way that really encompasses all the questions related, clearly needed to have someone from crop sciences. And so another, I think, unique aspect of the Dudley Smith projects and the College of ACE's involvement in stewarding the Dudley Smith initiative, they help us kind of connect with other faculty and other researchers here within our College of ACE's that certainly we have a huge college here and span a lot of disciplines and have a lot of outstanding scientists. And so I reached out to crop scientists and asked who would maybe be a good person, and got a very resounding recommendation for Dr. Andrew Marganeau to work with on this. He had a cover crop experience and was definitely a soil health expert. So, this was the first time that Andrew and I got to meet, was through working on this proposal. And so looking forward to working on this. Travis Mateer, who many of you know, is a beef extension specialist here in the state, and he's working with us on the outreach part of this project. And then Ed Ballard, again, if you've been to a Dudley Smith Field Day in the past, or even if you haven't, you're probably very well aware of who Ed Ballard is, retired extension specialist. But this Dudley Smith farm and there at Pana has kind of been one of his babies, so to speak, that he's worked with for many years. All the projects that I've worked with at the Dudley Smith farm, Ed's been involved with, and Ed's outstanding cover crop and just grazing expert, and really brings a lot of historical knowledge of the farm, but also stays very current in these areas. And as with any research project, they wouldn't be possible without great graduate students. So 2 graduate students here involved with this project, one from animal sciences, a PhD student of mine, Kyla Ewing, and then a grad student from crop sciences working with Andrew, Taylor Berkshire. Certainly want to acknowledge the farm managers and tenants working with these projects, Danny and Fred Curtin there at the Dudley Smith farm. And then Miles Redden is our beef farm manager here on campus. And so appreciate all of their help. These projects take a lot of coordination, and you'll hear me talk about that quite a bit because there's a lot of moving parts, and something that other disciplines, other areas of research that are doing very, very controlled experiments, they can lay out an experiment and decide what day they're going to do something on, and it just works perfect. And it's so controlled. That is not how this kind of research works. I wish I could pick which day the corn was planted and which day the corn was harvested and which day the cover crops were planted and which days we were going to graze. And I could control which days it was going to rain, but I have none of those powers. So it's all kind of a work in progress, and we have to be able to make kind of game time decisions and make the best decisions that we can in the moment. So just a little bit more background on why we kind of came to the research questions that we did and what we're trying to accomplish here. As I alluded to before, integrated crop and beef cattle operations require a system evaluation, a system approach. Because if we only looked at it from the crop side, or we only looked at it from the beef cattle side, it may not make sense. Or we may miss things because there could be benefits to the other operation, and there could be costs to the other operation that we need to take into account. And it's really the synergy of these two that often makes them work. And to really understand if it's a good decision or not, we need to look at it from all aspects. Historically, these cover crops, as I said, have been used for their soil benefit. And there are plenty of crop farmers that use cover crops and they have no livestock, or even if some of them that do have livestock, they are not grazing or utilizing those cover crops for their cattle operation, because in many cases there isn't enough information on what would be the impact of that. Do they still get the same benefit to the soil and to the crop that they would if they wouldn't have grazed it? Or is there even possibly additional benefits? And so that kind of comes down to where it'll benefit livestock production as well. And the reason that is is because one of the things that cattle producers are always trying to manage are our feed costs. Feed costs represent over 60% of the costs associated with a beef operation. And the majority of those feed costs occur in the winter. And that's especially true here in the upper Midwest. Obviously, if you've been outside the last few days, you certainly understand that our cow-calf operations right now are feeding stored feeds in most instances, because even if they had some land set aside or some stockpile grass with the snow and the ice cover and these extreme temperatures, there's just really not much opportunity for grazing. And these stored feed costs are really costly. If you're doing an excellent job managing and utilizing some alternative feedstuffs, we can get those costs down to $1.50. And sometimes in some areas, you guys can maybe even get down to $1.25 or approach $1. But in many instances, these costs per cow per day in the winter can easily approach $2 or exceed $2 a day. And so cattle operations are interested in something that can extend that grazing season, right? What can we do in that late fall or winter or early springtime when our typical perennial cool season grasses are not available? That's really what we're trying to look for. So that kind of leads us then to this particular research overview, and our overarching central hypothesis is that grazing or harvesting these cover crops for feed will provide some short-term economic benefit while still providing the long-term conservation benefits and enhancement of soil health. Because if someone is in a crop operation and they're wanting to start utilizing these cover crops, it may be a couple years before they start to see that economic return. And certainly there's, if you want to look at it from a long-term standpoint, it still makes sense to do it. But from a cash flow standpoint, if there can be some immediate, same year economic return to the operation, then these decisions kind of have a whole different light on them. And so that's really what our overarching hypothesis is. And so what are we going to do? And so again, just to be clear, this project was funded there at the end of 19. And so obviously after there was any time to put any cover crops in then. And so this project really began in the fall of 2020, and we're just underway here now. So we have two objectives. Our first objective is to determine the forage yield, quality, and feed value of different small grain forage monocultures and legume blends, and I'll get to that in a minute. But then our objective two is to determine the effects of grazed or ungrazed cover crops on soil health, with an emphasis on the physical and biological soil health. And obviously, as you can tell by reading that, this is the objective that Andrew's team is going to focus on. And then us here in animal sciences will focus more on the feed value and from the animal standpoint. So here's just kind of an overview and a layout of the Dudley Smith farm. And if you've been by that farm or were by there late last fall, you probably saw on the south end of that farm some cover crops growing. There was a little bit later corn planting there at the Dudley Smith farm. That farm is historically a little wet, and when it rains in the spring, kind of just got to wait for it to dry out. And so, but the Curtin family, even though that crop went in late, they had a pretty timely harvest considering when it went in. And so corn was harvested there in that second week of October, and they're able to get in and drill seed these cover crops on October 15th. And so the four different combinations that we put in were cereal rye, triticale, and then cereal rye and crimson clover, and triticale and crimson clover. And for the monocultures, we went with 90 pounds per acre. And then on the blends, we did 75 of the cereal rye and 8 pounds of the crimson clover, or 75 of the triticale and 8 pounds of crimson clover again. You also see that dispersed throughout here, and again, this is just random as how we allotted that so that we have a cross section of the different terrain and variation in soil types in that field. We also have these yellow strips where we didn't seed anything, so just just bare corn stalks. And then what we're going to do is this spring we'll go out there and we'll graze this, and we're just going to graze the north half. The cows will have access to all this, so they can go and graze some of the cereal rye, or they can go over in one of the strips that's just triticale, or they can go into the strips that have the monoculture. And so we'll look at and take some observations and collect a little data on where they're at and what they're grazing. But then we'll also have this ungrazed portion, and in this ungrazed portion, that's where we'll take clip samples and look at the total yield, and we'll analyze those samples for the forage quality. But also last fall, there at the time of seeding, Andrew and his team collected several soil samples throughout there, and then we'll have soil samples again this spring here after grazing as well, to be able to look at how soil health and those characteristics have changed, not only across the different treatments, but also across grazed and ungrazed, and pre and post graze. So a lot of questions that can be answered with that. And then the plan is next spring for a soybean crop to go in following our cover crop. So one of the challenges, if you've worked with cover crops, is when do we get it in, and how much growth do we get in the fall, and then how quick does it start growing again in the spring, and how many days of grazing can you get on it before it's time to be getting that soybean crop in. And no 2 years are the same. Yeah, as I said, we got this one in a little later. If you were wanting to graze in the fall, you certainly would need to be getting it in before October 15th. Now, we were pretty fortunate that I don't know if it was that day or the next day, we got some rain and got another couple rains there in the next week, and really had pretty good emergence here at the Dudley Smith farm. So even though it was late, I think it got off to a good start. But if we were going to be able to do a fall grazing period, we would probably have needed to have that in more like the 1st of September. This spring, how many days will we be able to graze? It'll all depend again on the weather. Oftentimes you can get 30 days. Sometimes there's been reports of 60 days of grazing. And again, it depends on when you're able to start and when you want to get in and get that soybean crop put in behind it. So we'll see what we're able to accomplish, but it'll just kind of be depending on what the spring presents. So again, I kind of talked through a lot of this. This is what we're going to be looking at. And again, I talked through that. On the soil side, we're looking at structural stability, compaction, water infiltration. That water infiltration is certainly an important part here of the cover crops. We're looking at, not only what those cover crops are able to accomplish there in terms of allowing that water to infiltrate there and not run off. Obviously, there's kind of two key components to water infiltration. We want to avoid runoff, but we also want that water to be in the soil for that future crop. We're looking at compaction. That'll be an important one. We know that cattle can cause compaction. We've done some work previously there with cattle grazing and compaction. We are at a greater risk of compaction with spring grazing than we are fall grazing. When you graze in the fall, you have the whole winter of freezing and thawing to kind of help wash out, so to speak, some of those compaction effects. But when we graze in the spring, we don't have that. So how much compaction we have will depend on just how wet and muddy it is when we're out there. But typically, that compaction that does occur from cattle is just in those upper few inches, and really, in many cases, does not have any impact on that subsequent crop. But that's what we need to look at. Like I said, we're going to graze cattle out there. Plan is to stock at 1 cow per acre and graze half of that. And then we also have a plot here on Urbana. This is a different system. So rather than being part of a corn-soybean rotation, we plant an annual forage crop, summer annual, called teff. on one field there that we harvest for hay leach for use at our farm. And so we're putting this in a rotation with the teff. A couple things make that appealing. We were able to get our cover crop established sooner, and we can wait longer in the spring because we don't plant that teff as early. We don't plan to graze this. Our plan here is to harvest each of these strips and ensile it as silage, and then we're going to feed it to cattle. And so we use the same blends that we did at the Dudley Smith farm. We were able to get this in a little bit sooner, September 19th, so about a month sooner. But we didn't have any plans for anything in the fall there. Our plan is only to chop it in the spring. And so then we'll run an animal trial where we feed that to cattle. And so, we will be able to take forage samples and we'll do all the analysis of that, but then we'll also feed these 4 different treatments and a mixed grass hay control to gestating beef cows. And, we'll assess cow body weight, body condition score, and intake. So we'll not only have our analysis of the feed in terms of what the protein and energy content of those feedstuffs are, but we'll also have a feeding trial to be able to assess that. And all that's kind of important as we look at trying to put together the cost and benefit analysis. How much feed value we get out of this, or how many grazing days we get out of this, ultimately decides how much immediate economic return there is. And to put these cover crops in, using our actual cost of seed and kind of an estimated drilling cost, each of those crops would range anywhere from $45 to $80 an acre to put that in. And if we can graze 1 cow per acre and get 30 days, if that cow would have required $2 per day to be fed, that's $60. So that's going to offset most of it. If we could get 45 or 60 days of grazing, well, then we can easily offset the cost to establish that. And that's not taking into account any benefit to the crop side. And likewise, what we harvest here on campus, obviously we'll have additional costs associated with the harvest and storing of that feed that we'll have to take into consideration. But if we can get 60 days worth of feed from each acre, then we'll no question offset most of those costs. So again, want to thank the Dudley Smith initiative, and this project is funded as part of the Synergy program there. And the Office of Research, College of Aces, thank them for coordinating this and connecting me with Andrew, and looking forward to what our team can accomplish, and looking forward to being able to share some results with everyone at future meetings. And not totally sure where we're at on time. Ashley, how much time do we have for questions here?
So you have about a minute. I tried to ring the bell, but it doesn't pick up well. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't hear that. I'm sorry.
It's totally fine. It's totally fine. Yeah. So we have a question. How will the forage be allocated in the DSF in the Dudley Smith farm?
Yep. So go back to this layout here, and so what we're going to do is we're only going to graze half this. Our plan, we will probably strip graze, and again, a little bit depend on what we think our window for grazing is. If we think we only have a short window to graze, we won't strip graze. But if we think we can, get maybe 6 weeks, we'll go in and we'll put a fence across here and only let them have the first third for the first couple of weeks. Our water's here at the north end, and then we'll take that fence out and let them have a new strip, so they'll have 2/3 of it in that week 3 and 4, and then in week 5 and 6 they'd have access to this whole north half. And again, we'll stock at 1 cow per acre.
Thank you, Dan. So if I can get you to stop sharing your screen, and we can let Teresa share hers. Teresa, can you share your screen? So Teresa, she is a commercial ag extension educator. And it seems like the bell isn't working. So when you have 5 minutes left, Teresa, I'll just turn my video on and turn it right back off so you'll know. Teresa, if you're speaking, I can't hear you.
Oh, there we go. How's that?
Yes, I can hear you now.
All right. Sorry about that. I wanted to say thank you for allowing us to present our research. Unfortunately, we weren't able to start the program last spring like we wanted to due to the COVID and the nature of our research. So we got a 1-year extension. We will begin in March this year. We have several sites selected, but what we are looking at is invasive plants and how they are risk factors for diseases that get transmitted to not just the livestock, but also humans, and what approaches can be taken to ameliorate those effects. So a little bit about myself. I'm a extension specialist, cow-calf person. I work with small ruminants as well. And Chris Evans, who is the forester on the team, Yvette Johnson Walker, she is a veterinarian who has extensive public health work. Chris Stone, who is a medical entomologist. Travis Mateer, as Dan Scheich has said, is my cohort up in up north. I can't think of the name of the facility off the top of my head. And then Holly Tooten is another medical entomologist. And this team was brought together because we all bring to have unique specialties that will facilitate this grant to get done. Bear with me as my slides have changed. Ended up changing my screen. Sorry, everyone. Not sure.
Would you like me to run your slides for you if you can't get it?
And for some reason, there we go. So what we do know is that biological invasives, since at least the 1800s in the United States, whether it's intentional or unintentional, have increased, but really a lot of that has occurred in the 20th century. If you think about the pests that have been introduced, whether it be bugs or plants, there's a lot of evidence out there in the literature, and we know for a fact that these invasives are a threat to our ecosystems. And if you think about in Florida, where you have iguanas, you have the python populations, and moving up into Illinois, you think about the different invasive plants that are causing problems throughout Illinois. And as time has gone on, perceptions about these plants have changed. If you think about the fescue is not native to Illinois or the Midwest, but it was introduced as erosion control. Now it's everywhere, and anyone that has cattle knows that fescue can cause problems such as fescue toxicosis. Perceptions about these plants, these introduced animals, have changed. An example is where they introduced a meat source, a deer in British Columbia. And today the government's trying to cull the deer because they are causing problems to the community. So there are a lot of biological invasives, and they can potentially wreak havoc on the natural ecosystems. In Illinois, there are numerous, and this is an incomplete list. A lot of these will be very familiar to those that work out in the woods or even on their own farm. Autumn olive in southern Illinois, and even it's moving further north, you just see stands of autumn olive, and they just begin to take over if they're not immediately taken care of. Japanese barberry in some of the national forests, you see nothing but that covering the floor. Honeysuckles, the bushy honeysuckle is a really bad one, and it will completely invade a woods within about 10 years. And the bad thing about the bushy honeysuckle, it will sterilize the soil underneath and prevent the normal flora from growing. And multiflora rose, thistles, reed canary grass, Johnson grass, kudzu is a big one in southern Illinois, and even through the southern states. If you travel along the interstates, you will see kudzu just absolutely overtake areas. So there are numerous invasive plants in Illinois, and they are changing the microflora, and they're changing the ecosystems that are there, that should be there. So what we're trying to do is to understand the relationship between these invasive plants and the tick-borne diseases. And everything it interplays. You have the increase in an environment for the tick, you have an increase in the environment that makes it more habitable for the small rodents or the birds. And then you also have an environment that changes for the deer. All of these interplay to affect the prevalence of the ticks. And these are just some of the common disease vector ticks in Illinois. The most recent one would be the Gulf Coast tick, which has just been found in the last 2 or 3 years in southern Illinois. The not interesting thing about each tick, though, is that each tick carries its own specific diseases. So you want, what I tell a lot of the cattlemen is, if you get bit by a tick and it's latched on, grab that tick, pull it off with a pair of tweezers, put it in alcohol and save it. If you have any effects or any flu-like symptoms within 2 weeks, take that tick in, because it can help the doctors identify what disease those ticks could potentially be carrying. And this is just a small list of the diseases that we know are in Illinois. There are several others that haven't been found yet, but there is ongoing analysis of ticks to determine where they're at and if they are in Illinois. The alpha-gal, that's the allergy. If you have the alpha-gal allergy, you no longer can eat red meat. Anaplasmosis is one that humans can get, and as well affects our beef cattle quite badly. And Rocky Mountain spotted fever. I need to back up to Lyme disease. In the latest CDC data, Lyme disease cases have increased by over 500,000 in the US. Lyme disease presence in Illinois is increased by 15 or 20% across the state. So it's something that everybody needs to be aware of. Tularemia is hasn't been identified, or has been identified in Illinois, but it's in pockets so far. So there are many diseases, tick-borne diseases, that are present in Illinois. And this just gives you the life cycle for the Lyme disease, and it shows the interplay of what happens. So you have your reservoirs, your birds, your squirrels, your mice, and you have larvae that feed on that first host. And then that larvae grows, and then you have the nymph that feeds again. And then that nymph goes on and either bites a human, because then it's infected with Lyme disease, or it goes on and feeds on a third host, the deer, and then it drops and lays its eggs in the woods and starts the life cycle again. It's when your dog or yourself are out enjoying a park or the national forest or any kind of wooded area that you have the potential for a tick that may be infected with Lyme disease. So this is just a tick that shows the questing behavior. They sit on the end of sticks. They are usually on paths where they're attracted to carbon dioxide, and they wait for shadows to come along, and then they latch on to an animal as it moves through the forest. And this is questing. This is a really interesting picture where you see a nest of questing black-legged ticks in the forest litter. So you can imagine a small mammal or a bird going through there, how many could be picked up just by one particular pass through. So disease incidence factors, there are a lot of things that affect whether the presence of the disease, and that is the tick population. Does that tick have a food source? Does it have the right habitat? What's its survivability? And then that also is affected by the percent of the population that's infected, and amount of and proximity to infected hosts. So then access for transmission to humans. How many of those infected ticks are in proximity to humans? And the activity of those ticks. As we all know, it's a really cold time here right now in Illinois. Ticks are definitely not going to be active. Next week, we're going to have temperatures favorable that are in the lower 40s that may get up to mid 40s. You will actually start to see ticks becoming more active. So activity, and with people working in the woods or working in areas where there's a lot of brushy area, brush, foliage, or anything of that nature, will allow those ticks to quest and latch on. So what we do know is to have a really good tick population, you have to have higher humidities. Otherwise, the ticks will become desiccated. So in a really hot, dry summer, you can go walk out in the woods and not get very many ticks. If you have a closed canopy, that will also allow for the humidity to be there. Well-developed shrub layer. Again, some of these invasive plants develop that a shrub layer. Access to small mammals and birds. There are years where we have a lot of Paramyscus leucopus, which is the white-footed mouse, or we have a lot of songbirds. It varies depending on other factors as the other food sources for these birds. And also access to larger mammals, your deer or your cattle for the adult stage feeding. Humans and dogs are typically dead-end hosts. If you think about dogs, they are typically treated with chemicals that will kill the ticks. Humans typically will get bitten and the tick will be killed. So that they are considered dead-end hosts. So our tick population can be increased by having these invasive shrubs, which increases the shrub density compared to the native shrubs. The increase in shrub density increases the humidity, therefore increasing host populations, therefore increasing our tick population. So this is a vicious cycle that can be set up. And one of the things we want to look for is how can we ameliorate those situations easily. So for example, invasive shrub stem density was twice that of native shrub density. You get an 18-fold increase in overall density of plants in the honeysuckle invaded areas relative to uninvaded areas. exotic shrubs and vines, we've sort of talked about that. If you have exotic shrubs, you have twice as many adult ticks and nearly twice as many nymphs. The bushy honeysuckle, you have a higher abundance of both nymphs and adults. And tick preferences, they definitely like the bushy honeysuckle, the Japanese barberry, and the oriental bittersweet, according to previously published data. And this is just an example of the exotic shrubs, the kudzu that can overtake a tree easily, and then also the bushy honeysuckle. This is a great example of the Japanese barberry in some woods down in southern Illinois. As you can just see, it's replete with nothing but the barberry and provides an excellent habitat for our small mammals, which can increase our tick populations. So there's 3-stage life cycle of the ticks, and at each life stage, they need a blood meal. The not good thing is the spiral sheet that causes Lyme is not typically passed from an adult to an egg. So each generation must acquire infection from an infected host. However, with the exotic shrubs, those provide a really great habitat for the small rodents and birds that are the reservoirs for the spiral sheet that causes Lyme. And the significant reduction in ticks infected with Lyme disease are in areas where barberry was either controlled or absent. And as you can see the data there, in a heavy infestation, you have 131 to 200 infected ticks per acre. And if you get down to no or minimal infestation of barberry, you get the number of ticks dramatically increased from 3 to 36 per acre. So it's well documented that maintaining or controlling infestation of barberry works very well to control tick populations. In eastern Missouri, they found that the density of the Lone Star tick nymphs was infected with pathogens that causes ehrlichiosis was approximately 10-fold higher, and the honeysuckle invaded plots compared with native vegetative plots. So again, these plants are providing the optimal microenvironment for those ticks. And again, control does work. In invasive plant control studies, the tick population went down, or the percent of tick population infected did not change, but the overall number of infected ticks and all ticks was drastically reduced. Control Japanese barberry, nearly 60%. Bushy honeysuckle, almost 4-fold decrease. And again, just to show the Japanese or the bushy honeysuckle, requires a lot of time. If you do not want to use herbicides, you cannot just go out there, cut it down. It will keep coming back. You have to actually dig the roots out or use a herbicide to control it, because it will just overtake an area in a short period of time. So the invasive plants dramatically increase tick populations and the number of ticks infected due to habitat alteration. And control of these invasive plants is very important to, and it can have a huge impact on human health in a region by the reducing the potential transmission of tick-borne diseases. And for our project that will start here in March, we want to examine the relationship between different suites of invasive plants. We have a shrub, a herbaceous forb, and a grass, and the prevalence and diversity of tick species associated with human and animal pathogens in Illinois. What we plan to do is, through our objectives, is we want to first determine the abundance and distribution of tick species in our selected sampling sites. Our sampling sites, we have 6 sites located near Decatur, Illinois, and due to limited invasive species and limited actual sampling areas, we have 2 controls and 4 bushy honeysuckle sites up there. At Dixon Springs, we have 12 sites. We have 4 control sites and 8, 2 forbs, 2 bushes, and 2 of the others. And we will be assessing the association between the invasive plant species and the tick-borne by going out, and we will be dragging for ticks every 2 weeks, starting in March at Dixon Springs, and beginning of April, end of March, beginning of April, depending on the tick species time, in the Decatur sites. So we will be dragging for the ticks, and then we will collect the ticks. We will pool the ticks. We will figure out what species are there, and we will also analyze the ticks via PCR to determine what diseases are prevalent that will affect cattle or our livestock species as well as humans. And then we will go back and also assess the invasive plant on the plant species on the microclimate. We have what's called the hobo data loggers. We will be looking at temperature and also humidity at these different sites, these different habitats. And we want to relate these back again to the tick abundance that we're seeing and the prevalence of the different diseases and distribution of pathogens that these ticks are carrying. So just we want to thank the Dudley Smith we received the grant. We're very thankful that we got the grant. We see that this is going to be a benefit to cattlemen as well as even homeowners in Illinois. And we are looking forward to being able to get out in the field and do the requisite work here in less than a month. So thank you very much. Ashley, were there any questions?
There are none in the chat box now. Are there any questions for Teresa? If so, you can place them in the chat box. All right, thank you, Teresa. Lucas, can you share your slides now, please?
Yep.
All right. So Lucas Nera, he is a research specialist with the University of Illinois.
Yep. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about our research station. And it's really always, really excited to talk about that. I'm going to start here, just introducing myself a little bit. Oops, I ran out of here. Start over here. I'm not sure what to pass my presentation. Okay, I found over here. Nope.
Lucas, just scroll up to your top slide and then push play.
And then over here. So start like that. Let's see if that works. Well, I think that works. Can you guys see the slides?
Yes.
All right. So sorry about that. Just a short background about myself over here. I'm originally from Brazil, where I got my ag technician degree and had the opportunity to work with a lot of cow-calf producers and a couple large operations over there, breeding cows. And after that experience, I went out for the vet school, and in 2013, I got my DVM, and I went to work again with reproduction, a little bit of with genetics as well. And in 2016, I decided to face new challenges. So I applied for a trainee opportunity that Ohio State University was offering at that time. And I got the trainee, and they sent me to Montana, where I had a chance to spend a year learning about the cow-calf operation over there. So it was really nice and exciting, and I could learn a lot about that, especially English. So I could improve. Although I still a lot to work, I could improve that over there. And when I was in Montana, I had a chance to talk with Dr. Scheik, and he offered me the opportunity to come and spend a summer here in Dixon Springs. So I spent 6 months working with Frank Ireland. I was the manager at that time, and I had a lot of opportunity to learn about research over here, especially on the cow-calf. And after that, I went for my master's degree under Dr. Scheik and did my project at the R Center. And right after that, Frank was about to retire. I applied for the assistantship, and when retired, I got the interim manager position over here. So just a short pathway where I came from and where I am today. So we'll talk about our station first, and then a little bit about of the research that we've been doing over here. The station is located on the southern of the state, so it's one of the 3 beef cattle research stations. So this station was established to offer research in a new environment that could help the states that surround us over here. And this research station is really considered one of the biggest on the east side of the Mississippi River, and none of that would be possible if we wouldn't use 4,500 acres that's owned by the Shawnee National Forest. So the Shawnee is a big part of the Shawnee Forest is a big part of our operation, and we use also 500 acres of the university land over here. And of course, as you guys can imagine, 5,000 acres come with a lot of miles of fence and a lot of miles of roads as well. So this is just a map of our station, and of course, we've got a really nice structure over here to work with research, and especially our fields. We got fields all divided on the same size, and we got a couple fields that are in pretty big size that help us to divide with electric fence in different sizes as we would need for the research. So that's a really nice setting over here to conduct research as well. Our corrals, we got about 10 corrals to work cattle, and of course you guys can see that it makes our life much easier to run cattle through that different locations without having to haul them to far distances. And we also got one laboratory that we use to process samples and to analyze a couple of our samples. Here's just a picture of our students, pretty happy working in our lab. So we also got a really nice grow safe system. As Dr. Scheik said at the beginning, it for those that are not really familiar with that, it measures the amount of each animal's eat per day. So it's a really nice set of feed banks that can collect all that information, and it's really important for research and also to figure the feed efficiency of each individual animal. So here's just a couple pictures of a green barn that we renovated and just a new location for the system. So we are really excited to have that on our station. A little bit about our cattle and our calving system. Over here, we calve at the fall, so our calving season normally starts around September 1st, and we got about 800 mama cows, all crossbred with Simmental and Angus. We also do AI. We do inseminate 100% of our cows, and these cows that calve in September, we normally inseminate them in the middle of December. And at the same time that we AI our cows, we are also weaning our calves, and we do early weaning. So we take 100% of our calves at the same time that we are breeding our cows, And these calves are only 80 days of age at the time that we wean them. So you guys can imagine how our December month looks like over here, running a synchronization protocol plus weaning calves. So it's always a really nice and fun time that we have during the year. And we also do some crossbreeding for some breeding association. So it's just here a list of some of the breeds that we have done in the past. So those calves, when they're early weaning in December, we haul them to a different location here inside of the station where we do a short background system. So we normally feed these calves for around 60 days, and we do feed a creep diet and offer a free choice hay for those calves. So we hold them for 60 days, and normally after that we ship them to Urbana, to the feedlot, where they'll be finished over there, and they're normally sent to the slaughterhouse around 13, 14 months of age. So just like today, Dr. Shai commented at the beginning that we are preparing here to haul 250 calves this morning, and it's it it's nice to see those calves moving for the feedlot as well. Now over here, just a little bit about our heifers development. Uh, our heifers are developed on the grazing system, so we do select our heifers based on the previous performance and the structures and sires where they came from. But we also want to, look pretty close on those heifers when they're grazing. So we do a monthly assessment on them where we get a body weight and BCS during the grazing season, and then we do offer some supplementation for them as well. But we always wanted to focus on having our heifers develop in the same environment where they will have to be a cow. So here are just some pictures of our winter feeding system, and we feed our cows normally with hay and do some kind of supplementation using the byproducts, and we normally mix those byproducts with minerals and ionophores just to increase the efficiency of use of that feed. And a couple of years we've been using some corn silage mixed TMR or some sorghum silage as well. And it's all depending on the price of all those type of feeds throughout the year. So, and here's just a little bit about of our grazing structure. And here going to have to split between the university land and the federal land. So in our university land, we are allowed to use pesticides. So that's where we have most of corn or sorghum that we use for silage planted. And we also got some novel fascule that we use for research and grazing. And we also got a couple fields where we put some cover crops to get some couple more grazing days out of that. So just a couple pictures of that. And when we get a really good year of a rainfall and a really good year for pasture production, we even got a chance to cut some hay out of that. So and over here on the forest land, we are not allowed to use pesticides to control weeds or anything like that. So pretty much our strategy is clipping, clipping, and clipping. And when we talk about 5,000 acres, we mean clipping all year long. So every time we have a chance to go out and get some of the fields clean, that's what we do. And of course, we also do work with some grazing management. We never want to let our fields get overgrazed or anything like that, But mowing especially is the first tool that we use to control our weeds. And we also do some nitrogen application when we have a chance, and we do some overseeding in some of those fields with a tall fascule normally. And you guys know, just when you talk about grazing, then we always want to focus and have more grazing days throughout the year. And everybody that raises cattle knows that the feed or the majority of the cost over any feed on any cattle enterprise. So we always want to keep the price of that we spend with feed as short as we can. So we do use a lot of the FAST, just like I said, but we also have our regular rotational grazing system. And sometimes we try to get our field established to use for the stockpile. For those that are not familiar with a stockpile, it's just like you let it, you save some grass on the late summer and let it grow to be throughout the fall to be used on the winter to extend the grazing days. And if you have a chance, you want to apply some nitrogen on that to help that grass to grow faster and better throughout the resting period. And for those that has done some type of a stockpile grazing in the past, know that the acreage is really a challenge for that, because when you have to let the grass rest and they grow, you got to have another place to keep those cows, right? So it's and knowing that challenge, we came up with this project where we want to try to offer some type of a spring stockpile grass and fall stockpile grass to help those cows grazing and extend those grazing days. So we just did the comparison between a regular rotational grazing system with a spring plus a fall stockpile grazing system. And I'm going to get here in a little bit more details on that. So just a little bit about of the experimental design for this research. We have two treatments being applied. One treatment is rotational plus stockpile that are going to address here as just stockpile, and a conventional rotational system that we're going to address over here just as a control. So we had 3 replicates for each one of these treatments with 60 cows per replicate. So just a total of 360 cows on this research. And just point out over here that this is really one of the nice things about our research station, with the large amount of animals that we have and the large amount of fields that we have as well. We can do this type of research using big groups like that can definitely help the producers with bigger, larger incomes over there. So just, as you guys know, when we talk about grazing system, we depends a lot on the environment. And here we just want to show you guys about how our rainfall was spread throughout 2020 when we compare with the long-term. So this is an orange line. It's just a long-term average rain per month since 1990, and a comparison with the 2020. And as you guys can see, we got a pretty good amount of rain in June, much more than we used to have, and again in October as well. So I guess what I'm saying here is that I don't think anybody at this part of the state could complain about the rainfall this year. It was a really good year for grazing, for sure. And you guys will see that this rain, all this amount of rain that came, that did some impact on our research, and I'm going to show you guys here in just a minute. So just here an illustration about the control treatment. So each replicates with 60 cows had access to 120 acres. Those 120 acres were split in 8 paddocks of 15 acres. So here on this graph, you guys can see that each one of the box means 1 acre, and the different colors mean a different field. So we got 8 fields with 15 acres each one, and the animals were rotated and every 5 days between fields, and each field had a chance to rest for 35 days. So you guys see here round number 1. When you go on round number 2, starting beginning of June and ending on the middle of July, round number 3, and round number 4. So here round number 4 starting at the end of August, that goes all the way to the beginning of October. And on the September 1st, like I said at the beginning, is when we start our calving season. And on round number 5, they would finish on November 10th. And that's really nice, because normally this is when we would be quitting our grazing days over here, the station, and start feeding our cows. But with all that rain that we got, we were able to graze another 5 paddocks during the round 6. So that really helped the extend the grazing season this year. So the control group were able to graze all the way up to December 5. So here is just an illustration of our stockpile treatment, where they had the same amount of 120 acres, but over here they were rotated every 7 days. And we saved a quarter of the land to be grazed later in the summer. And that quarter of the land, we call it a spring stockpile. So we had just 6 fields that were grazed during 7 days, and those fields were resting for 35 days. So this is just a rotational raise on the round number 1. And when I pass on round number 2, it ended on July 15th. And when we moved to round number 3, that second quarter was also resting for a pre-fall stockpiling. And I'm going to show you guys over here in just a minute how that were grazed. But pretty much we had this second, we had this other half of the land being grazed regularly with 7 days grazing as well. And then when they got done grazing the half of the fields, we applied 100 pounds of urea per acre on those fields, and they were resting to become our fall stockpile. So as you guys can see here at the bottom, the fall stockpile. So then in August 12th, we start grazing the first quarter, and those fields were strip grazing. And this is really important to point out over here. That's from now all the way to the end of this project over here. They were strip grazing, so they start on that spring stockpile with rotating, moving every 3 days to a 2 acres. So they got those strip done and about September 26th, and then they went to the pre-fall stockpiling, and on the pre-fall stockpiling, they had 3 acres grazed every 3 days. And then, of course, after that, on October 26th, they moved it to the second half of those fields, where they continue strip grazing 3 acres every 3 days. And as you guys can see, those colors on the street show how they move it, and they were able to graze all the way up to December 24th. So we're just gonna jump here and some results out of this project, but I just would like to point out again that all the rain that we got here, more than our averages to be, gonna have some effect on our numbers. And here just body weight of our cows from the initial body weight when we started the project through the calving, breeding, and all the way to the final weight. There was no difference between body weight of those cows. Short tendons over here on the final weight, but really not a difference. And on cows BCS, also through calving, breeding, and final BCS, they were no different. So cows were really, they really had the same performance over here. Looking at the AI conception rate between the stockpile and control, although those numbers looks different, statistically they were not different. And this research wasn't really designed to prove anything on the repro rate, so we were looking more on grazing days. So moving for results on the calves, the calves birth weight were the same as well as also the weaning body weight of those animals. And you may look at those numbers, 188 pounds, 109 pounds, 194 pounds, and think that's a really light, but you gotta remember that we wean our calves around 80 days of age. So, just keeping that in mind over here. And now just showing you a little bit of our grazing performance for those cows. And stockpile grazed for 249 days, and control were able to graze for 227 days. Again, really nice year for grazing was 2020. And considering here the amount of nitrogen that was applied per replicate on the stockpile, we were able to apply 3 tons of nitrogen on those fields. And when we compare the amount of days that were grazed and the amount of hay that was fed, we saw that the control group had about 12 tons of dry matter of hay, compared with the stockpile that was just 1.85. And here I'm going to show you guys a little bit about the economics of that. It's just a short table to point out how what we noticed throughout this first year. But if we price the ton of dry matter for hay at $95, we noticed that the control, since they ate about 12 tons of hay, expend about $1,100. And when we add the amount of dollars that were paid for the nitrogen application and consider the whole system on stockpile complete, comparing with the control, we were able to see that the stockpile really spend more money than the control. So it may was not the best year to do the stockpile, but actually what we see out of here is that really 2020 was a really good year for grazing, and the control were able to graze way more than we expected. So the stockpile was a little bit more expensive than control on this first year. We will do this research again and throughout 2021 as we are doing a comparison between two different systems. We also want to do more than 1 year so that things like that don't affect our research and outcomes of that. So with that, I'd like to acknowledge here the IBA that is funding this project, as also, of course, our students that help us here at the station, the summer interns, the fall interns, grad students. They are always a really important part of our program, and our crew over here that work with us every day. I also would like to offer over here for those that are interested into some internship with us. Dixon Springs offer internship throughout of the year. So if you guys are interested to get some hands-on experience, or if you have anybody, students or somebody that that would love this opportunity, please, just let them know to shoot me an email over here on lucastn@illinois.edu. Yep, and I think that's all I had for today, and I'll be glad to entertain if any question that you guys may have.
Are there any questions for Lucas? If so, you can place them in the chat box. There are no questions at this time, Lucas. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cliff, would you like to share your screen? Our next presenter is Cliff Schutte, who is the Illinois Grazing Lands Coalition Chairman.
Cliff, you're also still muted. We can hear you now.
Okay. Is the presentation up?
Yes, do you want to put it in presentation mode?
Trying to find that. Where that would be at. Let's see. Nope. No. Let's see, trying to get to the presentation mode. Any ideas?
If you go to the top right-hand corner and hit the present button, possibly go down a little. Perfect.
Good. Can I bring this over here then? Sure. Back. Okay. All right, I think, did everybody see the first slide?
Yes.
Okay. All right, thanks Ashley and the Dudley Smith Planning Committee for putting this together. I've been involved with Dudley Smith probably from the early years. Just giving an example, when the novel fescue came out, they were one of the first ones to plant it up there to paint a farm. So that's been good to see that they've been on the cutting edge of doing different projects. And as we heard earlier today, they continue on with that. So I'll tell you a little bit about about myself. Here from Clinton County, Illinois. That's about 40 miles east of St. Louis. I'm sitting in the middle of dairy country. We got a lot of dairies here. They are leaving slowly, but still the #1 dairy county in Illinois. We have a beef cow herd of spring and fall calvers. And when that's not keeping us busy, then I'm also district sales manager for Stein Seed Company for 33 years and been selling forages for 20 years for several different companies. So as you see the first picture here, you guys, some of you might have seen this almost 20 years ago, because that's when I got started with forages back in late 90s. Thanks, to Ed Ballard and Tom Sachs were the two ones that kind of directed me down that road, both retired extension people. So we got into grazing. So the reason I got into grazing and love beef cattle my whole life is trying to make some money off the land. And what was pointed out to me, and it was said several times earlier today, that cow cost is where people run astray on making money with the beef cow herd. So the SPOW data was what we looked at years ago. Got involved with that with Alan Miller and Ed and Tom. We looked at what's the things that we can hone in on the most, and the biggest thing was feed cost. And over 60% of that, is feed cost, and most of that is harvested feed, which will tie into cover crops here later. And then the biggest variance between each producer was, the feed cost varied almost 56% also. So that's where we really tried to go years ago, is just bring that cow cost down, and we did an excellent job of that years ago. Back then, the cow cost was, $350 to $400 in 1990, 2014, $850 to $900. And with the feed cost that's probably coming around this year to the higher byproducts and land price and commodity price, we're probably going to be approaching $1,000 per cow. So we definitely got to address this feed cost issue on the cows if we're going to try to keep some of them in Illinois. I'm going to switch gears here a little bit. We tried feed costs, looking at that over the years, bring that down. We really didn't know what was going on below our feet as far as soil health and stuff like that. We just wanted to bring the cow cost down. But about 5-6 years ago, got involved with Farm Bureau. I'm on the board there, and I'm also on the Salt and Water Board. I'm in Clinton County here. So we got some grants from the Illinois Farm Bureau that they give the different counties that you apply for. And in the last 6 years, we've got grant money here in Illinois or in Clinton County to do some field days and do some soil testing and free manure samples to anybody that wants to participate. So here's cover crops and no-till. We'll talk a little bit about that for a little bit here. And I think people really need to pay attention to this as they're driving down the road and see the differences that are going on. This is cover crops and no-till. This is one of the producers I've been working with for about 15 to 20 years on the left. And on the right is his neighbor that's coming through the road ditch and coming onto his land. So you see where cover crops and no-till are at here and how big a difference it makes. And it'll be pointed out a little bit more further in the next couple slides. But please look at this. This is going on everywhere. This needs to be addressed, otherwise we will get regulated to no end. Here's a close-up picture of cover crops and no-till. These are water samples that we've taken off the fields over the last couple of years and had them analyzed. Then also look at the till, the no cover crops on the right, how dirty that jar is. And then rotational grazing, which big proponent of that, high stock density grazing we move more into now. But I will remind everybody, a bad rotational grazing or continuous grazing is just as bad as tilled and cover crops. Just because it's in pasture does not mean that nutrients are going down the ditch. And I think that's what we really got to pay closer attention to with the different pastures and grazing. We're going to get into some of the field days now that we've had over here the last 6 years. The guy in the salt pit there is no longer with us, Mike Plummer, but he's probably one of the pioneers that started cover crops, as he used to name it. When me and Ed and Tom were running around doing meetings, we call them forages, and the cows left, so now we call them cover crops. Both are good terminology, and we need to use both of them. But he's been a big proponent, was a big proponent, and did a lot of work in Southern Illinois. Also big with ryegrass. He's really promoted that. I'm a big promoter of ryegrass. If you want one single plant to do the most for you and heal your ground the fastest and feed cattle, ryegrass is your choice, but it comes with some baggage on termination, so keep that in mind. Just to give you an example there, this is one of the producers that's first time that he's rented this ground. We have cereal rye here. It went down 1.5 feet. We also sold annual ryegrass that went down the first year 3 to 4 foot. So just difference in different cover crops is going to make a big difference on how you're going to get to your end goal of soil health, raising forages and grazing. So that was a big thing that we learned there with Mike and annual ryegrass, and thank God he led us on to annual ryegrass and keep pushing with that. Here's another one at a field day. Ray Archuleta, he did a ring simulator for us there on infiltration. That's a big thing, and the next slide will really point out more to that. Is we're working with the Kaskaskia students. We got about 15 people or 15 groups working with the nutrient loss reduction strategy here in Clinton County. So they're doing the slate test, and they are also doing the infiltration right there. Ray is posing the question to us in the group here. Do we have a flooding problem? Do we have droughts? Do we have climate change? Or do we have an infiltration problem? The reason I say that is because I've been over the last 20 years working with producers and working with Ray and Gabe Brown and the rest of them. Most of our soils in Illinois can handle maybe 1/2 inch to maybe over 1 inch if we're lucky. Some of them producers they're working with that have been in cover crops, high stock density grazing, can get anywhere from 6 to 11 inches at a high end. If we could just get 2 to 3 inches in our soils all along the Mississippi River, how much faster do you think that we can clean up the Gulf of Mexico, which the nutrient loss reduction strategy is all about, to reduce phosphorus and nitrogen. 2025 is coming up real fast when our first goals need to be met with EPA and that there. So stay tuned. I know our numbers last time went backwards, so we got a lot to do there yet. Doug Peterson, NRCS guy, so is Ray. Both of them are retired. Both of them are working for Understanding Ag right now. If you guys haven't found Understanding Ag, please do. It's a wealth of information. But Doug has a beef cow herd in Missouri. So it's always good to get a presenter there that's trying this stuff himself. And he was presenting to us that day in the salt pit there where we had a variety trial out, and did an excellent job talking more on the grazing side and different rooting depth also. As you can see in that structure there, we got 3 different classes of soil there that we're working with, and we're trying to punch that top black down through there. And this producer that we're working with here is a dairy farmer and now has some organic matter approaching 6%. 15 years ago, that was 3%. So tied with grazing, cover crops, and that stuff, it can be done. It doesn't take a lifetime to get it back what it was when we broke it out of the prairie. And actually, I think we can actually do better than what it was with the right management, the right tools, which we have a ton of tools to work with. We just got to put them together. Here's Chris Reynolds, American Farmland Trust, another speaker at the field day. Chris has been really instrumental in the fall covers for spring savings that just got over with. 185,000 acres were signed up. This is in a field day, just how crazy we are. We were in a field day in December, out there digging through the forage plots. That's still probably above dairy quality feed the middle of December. So we can grow the cover and good forage and let them stockpile if we have to. Chris has been good, and hopefully my goal is that in the next farm bill that we can get the pilot program that Chris is running here in Illinois with other groups, and Iowa are the only 2 states that are doing it, to put that nationwide, that kind of program in the next farm bill. So that'll give you some participants some things to think about. Maybe I'm a little out there, but if we are going to move this movement, soil health, and clean our nutrients up, we're going to have a ton of acres be covered. And I said this 20 years ago in Omaha, Nebraska, to get producers on board to tie it to crop insurance, and it will get done. So we'll see what happens there. So these are the critters that are your friends. Tillage is not good. If you can slowly move away from it, that will be the best thing. That shovel full that you saw before, we took them back, sorted them all out before we ate lunch that day. And that was 56 worms in one shovel full. That's like cottage cheese that's underneath the ground there. So that's what can be done if you bring the right stuff together, different cover crop mixes, no tillage. Then you get these guys that do the work for you, and they show up for work every day. They don't call in sick. They don't break down, just as long as you feed them. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. As I should have mentioned before, I got 25 minutes for this presentation, and I've been doing this for 25 years. So we're covering 25 years here. Hopefully that you guys ain't too fast, that we can get through stuff and spur some questions. But this graph was probably back in 2000, where we, trying to fill in the gaps. Someone says, well, why don't you come up with a grass, or someone come up with a grass that has a straight bar all the way across, and we don't have to figure all this out. Well, Mother Nature doesn't play like that. So we have to do some management and think a little bit. So there's some cool season, warm seasons. We're big cool seasons through this area here. A lot of fescue, a lot of clovers, and a few forbs or broadleafs. But to get us away from that feed cost in the wintertime, which is the problem, we're going to have to get summer annuals or warm season perennials to get off the cool season grasses in August and September, to let them regrow and recharge and stockpile to do that. That's why I put that stockpiled out there on the far side. That line needs to come up. And then with cover crops, we can get that bridged out there further. So that's some stuff that we need to improve upon, and good to see the work of Dixon Springs on doing that stuff, and at the Dudley Smith to hopefully get some more data. But that's where we need to improve. Like I said, I'm in the 4-H business. There's a lot of good companies out there. Please work with somebody that knows what's going on, not just to say they sell cover crops. There is too many train wrecks that can go on with these cover crops that people run from them because they had a bad experience. Give you a perfect example is that there on the bottom that's a Southern rye. It's been out since 1970. It's a very good rye. That rye will head 2 weeks before the northern rye. So right there, you can see that's ryegrass in the front there. But if you would say have Ryman rye, that would be the same height as your ryegrass. Doesn't get as tall and heads later. So that's some stuff that we can look at. That's the biggest difference. But even in clovers, even in ryegrasses, barley, there's just a ton of things that we need to look for. If we're going to be using cover crops and grazing, and we're going to go to corn next year, we need to have oats and barley in front of it, not so much rye, because that can have a allelopathic effect. And we got to front load nitrogen a bunch. Not saying it can't be done, because that producer where we're at right there, where the pictures are taking, 2 years ago when we planted late, the rye was headed out, put on 90 units of nitrogen up front, and side dress when the corn was at V4, and raised 225 bushel an acre corn. It had the highest corn yield in the Farm Bureau's corn survey tour in August. So it's more challenging, but it can be done. Just go from there. Ryegrasses, as you can see, the shine that's on them. Cattle love ryegrass. It's definitely something that it needs to be in all the mixes. And I'm going to get into some mixes here that's where we need to go. That's probably the biggest thing that I've learned in the past 25 years is getting away from monocultures and going to blends. In the last 2-3 years, we've been going to 6 to 9 way blends. Just think of that. Don't get scared of that. Your seed bill doesn't go up much. We're still in that, just for covers, $20 to $30 range. And if you want forages, you might be at $30 to $40 range. We just back stuff out so they can all compete. Blends are your friend. And they're also what the biology loves. As most of you guys, hopefully this year will go back out and eat and smorgasbords and like to order different things. That's what the biology loves below the ground. That soil is just not to hold the plant up. It's actually there supposed to do stuff for us. So that's why if you put the different things in, in the prairie and the forest, they have a whole bunch of different things. So I don't know what the right answer is. I think that answer might be coming in years down the road, but please put in 1, 2, or 3. Try to get the 3: 1 grass, 1 legume, 1 forb or broadleaf. Another thing is on clover. This is the newcomer to the market. It's a Balanza clover. It's a white clover that will get waist high. We've been used to white clovers, Dutch white clover. That's a pain in the butt, and then you got your improved white clovers. This has a hollow stem, so it will roll or crimp. Feed quality is just amazing on it. It loves wet feet. So there was a comment earlier, maybe at Dudley Smith there, used some crimson clover. Balanza clover would blow it away in a flat situation. We have dairy farmers that are using all the ground, even their bottom ground that's been flooded 4 to 5 times over the winter. We'll still have an 80% stand of ryegrass and Balanza clover. You will have 0 rye and 0 crimson clover in them same situations. So just like you're ordering corn and soybeans, there's that many choices in the 4-H mix also. So keep that in mind. See a little picture on the right there of a 7-way mix. That's when we were just getting started a couple years ago with the blends. Here's some data that we've been taking over the years at our different plots. There's a lot of stuff there. Well, I'll draw your attention to the bottom of the mix of all cover crops. This is not scientific at all. We plant all of them as monocultures. Then we leave all the bags open, and then I get a handful or 2 handfuls or 3 handfuls, depending on seeding rate. Like triticale and rye is a lot more than Balanza clover. And we put them in a bag and we shake them up upside down 4 to 5 times, meaning that a guy that's there, and we put them in a drill and seed it. So look at this, was seeded in October 24th of last year. And then this was the spring analysis here. So another thing that, Mike commented on years ago is that, ryegrass has some issues with winter survivability. And we planted this plot late because that's what everybody usually gets into, is not getting their cover crops out in time. So we planted October 24th, which is a little late for most of these varieties except triticale and rye. And then you can see what Mother Nature can throw at you. And this is why I'm a big proponent of blends. So cereal rye, triticale should have ran away from everything in that late plant seeding. Look what did the best on there. Ryegrasses did very well. Look at the Balanza clover, 2.3 point tons at 45% moisture. Crimson clover did not show up at all. Hairy vetch got cracked a little bit when it was seeded, so a little bit of a hiccup there. But just look at the 2 no-nos that we were told probably wouldn't worked very well because it was a wet, cold fall. So that's why we put different things in the mix, and Mother Nature will dictate on which is going to make it. So look at the mix down there. The surprising thing about all this is the Balanza or the crimson clover and the hairy vetch were both in the mix. They made it in a mix. They did not make it as a monoculture. So that's a big take-home message there. Here's some soil health scores that we've came up with. Balanza clover in that same plot, 30.8, which is very good. I mean, look at the rye and ryegrass due to the thinner stands, not as good. So we're using a Haney test, and that is a work in progress, the soil health scores. Another example is at the farm, at another guy's farm that we were looking at earlier, March sample. The only thing that registered was the southern rye, the winter grazer, because that's the only thing that was growing in March. So just when you think, nothing's going on out there, there could be something going on. Just got to get the right varieties. Moving into this summer, had a virtual field day out at Mark Littleton's, where we put out, I think it was about 15 different mixes. And you can see the differences there. This on the bottom, this is where we started with teff grass and all that stuff, which didn't grow very well. And then we had turnips, buckwheat, and you can see on the list as we're coming up forward, and then all the way to sorghum stand, and all the way to the left is the 15-way mix. So this is the difference there. This is all within 40 days of growth, with the first 10 days of no rain. So this is tremendous. We can grow a lot of summer annuals. I think we need to get into a rotation, putting some wheat out as a third crop. and not put double crop soybeans out and grow forages for cattle. And then we can come back in late September, early October, whatever we need to do, and put our cool season mix out there that we're going to get a good there. So this is some cattle grazing there. Travis Mateer has been at one of the field days at Paul Myers talking about forage quality. He's done a lot of work in that there, and enjoy working with him. This can be bale aged and chopped. I am working with a dairy producer that in Canada has dropped his corn silage out, his alfalfa out, and went to these complex cover crop mixes, and his milk production has went up 90 pounds tank average with no corn silage and no alfalfa. But with these mixes, cow comfort, cow breed back is better than corn silage and alfalfa. So we definitely need to rethink about what is king in the countryside. Here's some summer data that's in there. You know, this is 15 different things. As you look at the bottom again, 15-way mix. You know, that's almost 10 ton at 50%. So that's 4 to 5 ton of dry matter in 40 days. Phenomenal amount of forage that we can grow. And you can see all the different mixes there. The summer sun hemp is a really good one to get a nettle legume out there. The cowpeas has been really good. We all know about the sorghums and the millets. I will say on some of the work of Dudley Smith that Frank done years ago, if you're on clay hills and tight soils, plant the sorghum sedans. If you're on flat, more loam stuff, then use the millets. They'll work out a little bit better. That's just some, you know, take home stuff there. Okay, we're running out of time here in a little bit, so I got to fast forward. This won't apply to a lot of people, but if more cattle are in confinement, we're going to have to do these choices. And this was at one of our field days also. You know, which one do you pick? There's a lot of different choices out there. We're doing a lot of guys with cover crops with the box spreader, getting some growth out there and putting 2 to 3 ton an acre on lightly, not 10 to 20 ton that most people are putting on. Let the biology take it down and then coming back 2 to 3 months later and putting another one on there. Drag line. This is big in this area here with all the dairy livestock and lagoons. Hog pits could be used there. So guy took off this forage here, and then we came in and drag lined it in. And as you can see there, which one will regrow the fastest and which one did the most damage. So the top right is the least amount of damage. That rig there came out of Canada. It's on 7 or 8 inch centers, and it's pushed about 1 inch deep. The drawback to that, your pit has to be clean, or your lagoon has to be clean, or it will clog up. So some of these other ones were being looked at also. Here's the biggest thing I think where we go wrong that we can correct, say last November or December for this year's planning. Make plans ahead of time. Maturity and height. That is an 80 inch hybrid out there, and that's a 120 inch hybrid. And these hybrids are on the market. So if we're trying to collect sunlight to the ground, we got to have a plan what to use, what maturity to use. And then also the biggest one, if we're going to be flying, which we'll get into in a minute here, we got to watch our residuals, because we're flying in August, September. Some of them residuals are there yet. And you definitely need to pay attention to that. Look at Missouri University or Penn State. They got some graphs on that. Here you go. On it go. This is top left is a plain guy that was flying that wasn't flying right. The one on the bottom there did it just perfect, and the corn is at the right height or the right maturity. And then if you're using helicopters, we've been using helicopters the last 2 or 3 years. They have spreader bars that are worth $30,000 to $40,000 that can put ryegrass, crimson clover, and radish on at 15 pounds on a 58 acre field, and then spread 57 acres perfectly. So it can be done. If you don't like heists, there's a drill on the bottom. There's your vertical seeder with a box on it. And if you want to terminate cover crops, the roller crimper is one to go with. There's also a drone, which was at the field day. You can use it for seeding like Bronza clover, which is very small seed. So can be used for cover crops with not a high use rate. Also use fungicides and herbicides can be used with that drone. That was interesting, a new take. Also, you could use some robots that go down through the row. Then if Mother Nature works with you and you have a plan, this is what can happen. This is late October, shelling corn, flown on late August. These are cattle out grazing when the combine left the field. That is probably better than a TMR ration right there with the soybean husk, the corn that was missed, turnips, rye, and oats. And they say, can you get a good enough feed sample? It is tough, but it can be done, because we are dealing with so many good forages that don't lignify over winter. they lignify in the spring and summer. So I've come to the realization that just because it's green, go out and graze it. I actually wait to December or January to get it froze to knock some feed quality out of it. Because right there, them totals that you're seeing there is twice what a wet cow needs as far as protein and RFQ. Another thing is when you guys are getting feed samples and using grasses, make sure you get an RFQ sample, not an RFE, because RFE was derived from alfalfa. RFQ will pull the energy out of the grass. And that's where we need to look at closer if we're using a lot of these grasses. And if that doesn't work for you, as I said earlier, from the start, Dudley Smith was the first one to use some of the novel fescue. The Max Q was out there a long time ago. There's 4 or 5 companies that have it now. So fescue needs to be in everybody's arsenal, the novel fescue. So when that fails, this is stockpile forages that we put on hog manure in August on Kentucky 31. Perfect growing season. In the fall, had moisture. January 9th, 16.1 protein. You know, once we knew better then, RFQ would have probably been a 130 to 140. 7,000 pounds of dry matter since late August, and that was January 9th. One of the better years. There's fall calvers out there on them, and they're digging through the snow. Just a little plug here at the end. If you need a grazing make sense calendar, get a hold of Angie down there at the Soil Water office. She's kind of coordinate that, get a copy. Another thing is we got, hopefully, we'll have in-person Heart of America Grazing Conference. Will be August 10th and 11th. The 10th will be a field day out of Prairie Hoddises, and then the next day we'll have a conference there, a full day conference with top-notch speakers and that there. And then if you guys are wanting to rent some land out or looking for land for grazing, this just started this last year in Midwest Grazing Exchange. This is where you can jump on board and put, say, I got 100 acres, I got cover crops, somebody want to graze it. Or you're looking for grazing ground. So that's what we got there. There's some things that came along. So that's the end of the slides. Appreciate able to share some of this information that we've been doing. We've been blessed to work with the Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy Grant here in Clinton County. Gives us some money to work with to learn some stuff with producers, and usually 5 to 6 producers, you know, that we're working with. Normally 2 to 3 is the main ones, but we have pulled in 6 of them in the past. And try to get more information. Most of them are dairy farms. So, you know, that's what we have in this county, and we have to address this phosphorus issue. Otherwise, we will get shut down. We'll be like Chesapeake Bay. We don't want to do that. Where, you know, before you walk out in the morning, you better have a plan. If you don't have a plan, you'll be out of compliance. Lake Erie up there, you've seen the green water that was in the toilets and all that stuff there. Had to shut the lake down, bottled water. You know, close to Des Moines has issues there. You know, they latch into the Mississippi there in the Gulf. That's going to affect a lot of people. So we have the tools in front of us. We just got to look at them a little closer and get them adapted across more landscape. So thank you, Ashley.
Yes, if you have questions for Cliff, please place them in the chat box. Cliff, there is one question. How do you integrate the annual ryegrass into the cropping system of corn and soybeans? And what is your favorite mix ahead of corn on soybean stubble?
So here's the biggest, and I missed that a little bit. It's the setup that comes before, back to that slide, where to plan ahead. So let me get back to that here, right? Yeah, right there. This is where we got to get planned. I'm, you know, been in the seed business, so there's a lot of different maturities that we can go after. We're in this area, 108 day to 118 day. So if you're going to do that, you know, you want to use, you know, 108 day. That's if you're going on corn. But say you have a bean, you know, the beans is plant them, and then we're going to go to corn next year. So a perfect setup is to go to your earliest maturity that's in your area that you feel comfortable with. Plant them in April. They will come out in September. When you plant in September, you can go out there with a winter oat, a spring oat, maybe some barley. You would want to do crimson clover, hairy vetch, a pinch of hairy vetch until you get used to it, and then balanza clover. And then your 3 grasses would be barley, oats, and annual ryegrass. And then radish, turnip, and rapeseed. To get a 9-way mix would be the catalyst. Now, when you're going to get later, then you got to back some of them out, and then you won't use as many of them. So the plan comes actually now, or, you know, when you are your seed corn and your herbicide, that's when the plan starts for next year's application. And application can be done with a drill, can be done with a high boy, it can be done, you know, with a plane, helicopter. But you just got to plan ahead. And then also, To give you an example, this year we flew September 15th because of the late corn planting. It laid there 6 weeks. Right now, it's a carpet, but it's only 1 inch tall. So it will lay there. I'm more worried about the residual knocking it out than I am drought.
Thank you, Cliff. Are there any other questions for all of our presenters? So to Lucas, how many units of nitrogen per acre was applied to the stockpile pastures?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
So yeah, it was 100 pounds of a nitrogen 4600 per acre. And it was on a cost of around $25 applied per acre.
Any other questions? So if you are a certified crop advisor and you would like to receive continuing education units, here is the QR code for you. And you can scan that with your mobile device. And so we would like to thank all of our presenters as well as our participants for attending this morning session of the Dudley Smith Farm Winter Meeting. And so we are going to take a break and come back for 1:00 p.m. And we have another exciting session for our afternoon session. So we'll be back at 1 p.m.